To introduce our featured author, let us listen to PSSC's Vice Chairperson and the Vice President, the Philippine Political Science Association, Dr. Maria Lourdes Berenacio.
Thank you very much, Dr. Go. You know, one of the things that you would think that's a very easy thing to do is to introduce someone, particularly someone who is well known and things like that. But then again, you know, you think about all of the other little details that you know about the person, and it becomes clear that there's really no easy way to introduce someone who has done so much for the peace process, not only here in the Philippines, but also in other countries. So let me begin. Our speaker today, Miriam Coronel-Ferrer, is a founding member of the Southeast Asian Women Peace Mediators. She was a member of the United Nations Standby Team of Mediators for 3 years, where she did a mediation work support for UN missions in countries like Afghanistan, Maldives, Iraq, and Georgia. Previously, she headed the government panel that negotiated and signed the 2014 Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, or CAB, with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. And let me add that she's actually the very first woman who have actually done this, this feat. A retired professor of politics at the University of the Philippines, or UP, she once served as director of the Third World Studies Center and convener of the UP Program on Peace, Democratization, and Human Rights. She had also served as visiting professor in several Asian universities. Currently, she sits as a member of the Board of Trustees of the International Crisis Group and Geneva-based Interpeace. She sits in the advisory boards of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders in New York, the Peace Treaty Initiative of the Institute for Integrated Transitions in Barcelona, and Negotiation Strategies Institute at Harvard University. Recent awards received by Professor Coronel-Ferrer include the 2024 Rotary Peace Awards given in the Philippines, and of course, the 2023 Ramon Magsaysay Award given in Asia by the Ramon Magsaysay Foundation, the 2015 Hillary Rodham Clinton Award for Advancing Women, Peace, and Security that was given by Georgetown University for Women, Peace, and Security. And as well, she was listed among 5 Filipino women in the Forbes Asia 2024 list of 50 over 50. Professor Coronel-Ferrer has published several books and academic journals on democratization, civil society, human rights, and the peace process in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. She was founding co-chair of the Non-State Actors Working Group of the International Campaign to Ban Landmines from 1999 to 2004, and was one of the 27 Filipinas among 1,000 women for the Nobel Peace Prize nominated in 2005. An active advocate in her country, she co-led civil society initiative drafting of the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security, or the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. The Philippine National Action Plan was formally adopted by the government in 2010 March. As chair of the government panel, Professor Coronel-Ferrer became the first woman, as I've said, in the world to sign the chief negotiator of a major peace agreement with a non-state armed group. She continued in this capacity to oversee the CAB's implementation until the end of the term of President Simeon Benigno Aquino III in June 2016. So there's still a lot of things that we could actually learn from our speaker today, and there's still also a lot of things that we could learn from each other. So colleagues, let us all please welcome Professor Miriam Coronel-Ferrer.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat at maraming salamat sa napakagandang panimulang salita ni Dr. Dita, very personal account din, which is also the nature of the book. And of course, for the second time, just last month at the PPSA conference, it was also your unfortunate task, Dr. Veneracion, to introduce me. So thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about this book. which came 10 years after, which has come out 10 years after we signed the agreement, thanks to UP Press for their follow through. Dr. Leo is here with us and Kevin. Let me start by referring to what one of the foremost feminist writer of the 20th century, Virginia Woolf, said about memoirs, because this is, this falls into the category of a memoir, which is about an event and not really autobiography, which is your whole life story. She said that the problem with memoirs is that they leave out the person to whom the events are happening. And that's probably because she was writing in the 1900s, right? In the 20th century, when people were still more careful about what they publicized. Unlike today, everybody publishes very private stuff everywhere. Quoting from this statement by Virginia Woolf, the guidelines released by the Guardian, the press in newspaper in UK, said that we expect nakedness in memoirs. Now, the only time I remember using the word naked was, and it's not in the book, was when we were already reviewing the draft original Bangsamoro Basic Law that was produced to legislate the political aspect of the agreement during the time of President Aquino. And what happened was then Executive Secretary Jojo Ochoa, ES of Pinoy, what they did was when they did the legal review, because everything has to go through legal reviews, so many lawyers in the office of the president, in the respective departments concerned. Of course, we had our own plantilla of lawyers. What they did was they returned to the MILF their comments, the draft with all their comments inside. Now, how do you imagine you will negotiate changes in a draft when you have laid bare everything that you want, right? So you cannot trade here or there. You can no longer sort of like move slowly towards, so that it acquires more acceptability on the other side than just saying this is what we want, which is what they did. They returned the draft with all the legal comments, and there were a lot in almost every part. Some a word here, others really objecting to certain provisions. So that was a very difficult time for us. And I told the Executive Secretary Jojo Ochoa at that time, it's like we were negotiating naked. Parang hubad kang nakipag-negotiate. Alam na nila kung ano yung kailangan mo sa kanila, which is not really how you do negotiations. So, but then again, that's after we signed the agreement. And so it's not really there, but it just reminded me when the Guardian said that we expect nakedness in a memoir. I feel I have sufficiently exposed myself in writing this. Of course, the problem is that when you tell stories, you also expose others, right? Because they're a part of the story. Thus, the possibility of losing friends and creating enemies of people who are already your friends. Let's see. I don't know if they've received, if people from the MILF, for example, have started reading. I do owe a book to my counterpart, Mr. Iqbal, who is now the Minister of Education, because the last time I saw him when they organized a commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the CAB, he mentioned that I should give him a copy of the book, which I will. So in any case, writing a memoir thus also requires accountability for your words, for what you tell. And that's why probably Virginia Woolf found memoirs in the 1950s stale for that kind of lack of really bearing out of the self. Accountability includes legal accountability. For example, the publisher of Monica McWilliams, one of two women who negotiated the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 on the Northern Ireland peace process. She has written her autobiography, actually. And when I asked her about how did you decide what to put and not to put, she said that, well, actually, everything had to go through a legal review because the publisher was afraid that they might be sued and they don't want any complications like that. So UP didn't go through a legal review, doesn't go through a legal review when you publish, right? You look at the more scholarly aspects of a publication. But in any case, I did, in a way, I did have to take that to account. And in any case, also, we are not yet a very litigious society, or are we already? From sociologists here, are we already a litigious society? Maybe not. Everything is negotiable in the Philippines using non-formal ways. So memory, I had to confirm with others also, because sometimes, of course, you forget, right? So I would ask somebody who was there, do you remember exactly this and that? And they would say, sorry, I already forgot. I don't remember. Were you there? I'm not sure. They're not even there. And that's why it was very important to write it down, because over time, you do forget all of these details. I did keep a journal while we were negotiating. I was typing furiously aside from taking notes. We had people taking notes. Our secretariat was doing that, but I was doing my own note taking. And if I still had the energy at night, I would write up what happened on during that day, sort of like, just for my own thinking process or reflection process. So I do have reference from notes that were taken immediately after the incident. But even those journal notes may be misrepresentations of what others said, what people actually meant when they said these things, right? And so all of these really are part of the accountability that you do need when you get down to writing down your remembrances. My only defense is that if I made mistake, they were really honest mistakes. I had no malice or anything against anyone. So I may have deliberately left out details beyond what was necessary to tell the story or the context, because precisely it might hurt some people or impinge beyond discomfort level of my own privacy. In any case, the main story is really about the talks, the difficult issues, the atmosphere and exchanges inside the room, and the goings on around the process, because many things were going on, not just the actual negotiation process. And it's a story about a peace agreement, the outcome of the talks, which is really a text. So that's the text, the one that I'm holding. That was after the signing ceremony. So that was the last time I've held this book, because afterwards I only, I think, 6 copies. One was supposed to have been left in Malacanang, and one is with the MILF, one with the facilitator in Malaysia, and I'm no longer sure where in Malacanang it is. But that's the first and last time that I've held the copy that we actually signed using a very expensive pen given to us by the Office of the President. So it's a text. It's therefore, the book is a book about a book. The book being the peace agreement. And that's why if you go to the next photo, what you will see here, do I have the clicker? Where is it? You can see people, where are they looking? They're all looking in front because the words are written in front. And we use color coding. Green is the proposal of the MILF. Red is our proposal. And once we agree on the text, it becomes boldface black. So it was not a process where you had a group of people doing the writing of the text. Of course, we had documents. We exchanged drafts many, many times. Sometimes in parts, sometimes in the beginning, of course, in whole. They gave us a very thick book and we gave back a very short version of our initial proposal, which made them very angry, by the way. So that's how it was. For most parts, we were straining our necks, looking at the screen and hoping it will move faster, that more text will be put into boldface rather than you have all these permutations of a formulation that will go into each and every provision. So here is another photo. That's our side of the room. As you can see, we have the panel with us, our secretariat behind us, our lawyers as well, and other people who are involved in the technical working groups. So the story is really about this, how people argued, how people discussed, how people huddled. So this is what in mediation parlance is called the process design. How you structure the room, the table, the arrangements, the seating arrangements, how you make it more conducive, and so on. So for those who are going through these processes, all these little details are very important to them. And I've given many lectures for different people, just discussing all of these details, right? So because it helps, it helps them think about their own process. And a lot of consultations in between. When you are not formally meeting as a plenary or not meeting in your respective technical working groups, you'll be consulting with each other, with your lawyers. That's Mr. Iqbal on the left with his lawyers huddled around him. And Secretary Deles, our peace secretary before, working with one of our legal lawyers, Army Bayot, during a break, just reviewing how else we can tweak some of the text and find some consensus with the other side. And on the lower photo, that's the facilitator with the international observers, because international observers also sat in the negotiations. And they're also conferring because they're supporting the work of the facilitator, but basically they're observers. They don't speak unless they are asked to speak, but they are inside the room. So that's how it was in terms of the actual process, that many stories that you will find moving from one provision to another until we finish basically a comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro, which is made up of many parts. First, the framework agreement on the Bangsamoro, 4 annexes, and 1 addendum. And then finally, what should have been easy was just the introductory text to all of this compilation. But as it turned out, even that was very contentious. And until the last minute, we weren't sure if we were going to sign because they wouldn't agree to some of the changes that the president still wanted. After again going through some legal review on the introductory text. So let me just show you a little bit. Some of the sidelines that happened would be consultations in between. And whom did we consult? It was very important to talk to the local governments. On the left, this is the Zamboanga City Council. You can imagine how difficult it was for people in Zamboanga to accept this process after being attacked twice. Zamboanga siege, but by the Moro National Liberation Front, the other party. But for them, of course, it doesn't make a difference. MILF, they're all the same. Even the Maute group, ISIS group, all the same. So there was a lot of need to basically talk to all the people who would be affected, even though Zamboanga City itself was not going to be part of the agreement. And then, of course, the indigenous communities, the non-Moro indigenous communities, because they are the minorities within this minority grouping, and they also have their similar claims about land, resources, their own justice system, and the issues of their own representation within that order. So a lot of things, although not much about the consultations, because that's really a story in itself. The kinds of consultations that we had to do in different communities in order to make this process really one that has the support of the public, support of the parties, and even within government. Okay, so The other thing that we had to do was to negotiate within government. The president said, don't propose anything to me that has not had the approval of the cabinet secretary involved, or even all of these different agencies. We had to consult all the constitutional bodies, whether it's COA, COMELEC, civil service, because all of this had something to do with what we were negotiating. Are they under civil service? Can they have a different civil service regulations? What's the obligation of the audit? Of course, they're not exempted from audit, national audit, but they can certainly conduct their own internal audit. So all of these questions, which meant that all of these people, we would convene in clusters. At that time, the cabinet had, I think up to now, I'm not so sure, several clusters like the economic cluster, then you had the justice and security cluster, which was one of the most frequent group that we consulted, and so on. And every little thing that we needed to pass through in terms of our proposal, the proposal that we will give to the MILF had to have their approval before we actually suggested it to the president. And sometimes even if we already got their approval, the president just wouldn't say yes yet. So there were times when he would step out, go for a cigarette, and then come back and said, I'll think about it. Meaning, if we have a negotiation scheduled, then we don't have any guidelines, right? We just dribble the ball on that aspect, and then discuss the other aspects where we can actually move. So at the end of the day, we did manage to go through all these different processes. Framework agreement on the Bangsamoro. Remember Justice Marvick Leonen, former Dean of the College of Law, he was still the chair at that time. One of the big issues, and this is the photo of the president speaking in Malacanang while we were still in Kuala Lumpur, him making a speech, the eve of the approval of the whole text of the framework agreement, not the formal ceremony, but basically testifying that we have already agreed on the text of the framework agreement. And the president convened his cabinet and he made a speech that was live streamed in Kuala Lumpur. And you can see that the MILF was really very, very tearful, even for this very first breakthrough of coming up with the framework agreement. One of the very difficult issues that was solved at this point was the geographic coverage of the prospective autonomous government. You mentioned Coronel and Jensan, they are not part of the Bangsamoro. So you have Mindanao, and now you have a special autonomous region, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Government, but the rest are all neighbors. And you do have Muslim communities in all of this, and just practically everywhere in the whole country with the diaspora. You already have Muslim communities coming originally from Mindanao. But one of the things that we managed to get a compromise on is that for them to no longer include in the prospective coverage all the areas that already said no in previous plebiscites for the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. And there have been 2 plebiscites because that was the most contentious issues. And most of these are already non-Muslim dominated areas. So that in effect, the biggest compromise, one of the biggest compromise that we were able to secure from the MILF is to really lessen the scope of the potential coverage of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Government, and also to agree to the constitutional requirement that there be a plebiscite to affirm whether these places do want to be part of the Bangsamoro. And that is precisely what happened in 2019, when you have now a fairly more expanded Bangsamoro government than Bangsamoro Autonomous Region than the previous arm. What were added specifically was Cotabato City, which said yes, and then also some of the municipalities and villages that are now clustered in new territorial political jurisdiction called the special geographic areas. You will find the word geographic area in the Constitution under Article 11 on local autonomy, which says that an autonomous region in the Cordillera, which is not there yet, and in Mindanao, may be created from provinces, cities, and geographic areas, which was controversial because there has been no legislation to define what a geographic area is. But in the wisdom of the makers of the Constitution, they saw that it is a possibility to cluster areas that are now part of other provinces, in this case, part of North Cotabato or just Cotabato, to actually decide whether they want to be part of the region. But following the local government code, they needed the consent of their mother unit. So the barangay needed the consent of the municipality needed the consent of the province. And in the case of Cotabato, they agreed to let go of 60 plus barangays that are now clustered under the special geographic area. In the case of Lanao del Norte, there were 6 municipalities that wanted to be part of the Bangsamoro, but Lanao del Norte did not want to give them away. And that's why these 6 municipalities are still part of Lanao del Norte. So you may say that this very difficult issue of what is really now, should be now the Bangsamoro is one of the most, think about East Gaza, think about a West Bank, or even Jerusalem that's divided between East and West Jerusalem. These are precisely the issues that they have to settle. You have a historical occupation, not occupation, historical, how do you say, indigenous community that have lived there for the longest time, but because of migration, because of so many other changes, the introduction of plantation economy during the American colonial period, for example, you saw large tracts of Mindanao demographically changing. And what they wanted was precisely to recover what they called the Bangsamoro homeland / ancestral domain, which is a new language that they introduced, the MILF has introduced. And that's precisely the same issue now in trying, even if you get to a point where we can actually discuss for real the creation of 2 states, the Palestine, which is now actually recognized by several countries, and Israel, but without clear territorial boundaries yet. So that was one of the biggest things that we managed to do here. You can see in the photo, that's an Inquirer front page photo coming from the airport, and we were whisked to Malacanang. The night before, we were not sure if we were in for a scolding or for some chit chat with the president, who loves to tell stories, by the way, and just really good vibes coming from him. And it was the latter, because we were able to complete. And actually, the president was the one who helped solve one of the problems. When we couldn't figure out how to formulate, how to call the police force in the Bangsamoro, they did not want it to be called Bangsamoro, police force in the Bangsamoro, which is neutral, which is harmless. And we cannot agree to call it Bangsamoro, police force of the Bangsamoro, because the Constitution requires only one national police. So the president, when he was being told by Justice Leonen that that's one of the standing issues, he said, "Why don't you use 4? Police force for the Bangsamoro," and they accepted that. So that was one of the last issues as well that was resolved at that time. But by the way, this is still a pending issue now. Exactly what kind of powers, how powers over the police force will be delegated across the different levels: national, regional, provincial, municipality, and down. And this is of course very important in terms of security for the police. Annex on wealth sharing, that was the second one that we signed in July 2013. We signed it took us more than 6 months, 8 months actually, we did have the transitional arrangements modalities, which was very easy because it was just about the transition, and most of that was already in the framework agreement. But this one was also very difficult because it involved what revenues they would get, what taxes we can further devolve. Those of you who are familiar with the local government code know that we already devolve a lot of taxes to the local governments. So what's there to devolve? What still can you take out of the national and give to the region as a source of revenue for them, because they would argue that you can't have political autonomy without fiscal autonomy, which is true, right? So that was long negotiation. If you remember Commissioner Henares, it was very difficult to convince her that we give up 4 taxes that were not being collected under very wartime conditions, where government efficiency can hardly operate, right? But in any case, that's just one of the technical issues that had to be included here. The other difficulty was on the sharing over revenues that can come from fossil fuels. Not many studies have been done on the feasibility of finding oil and gas in this region. Even mines, my study of mines have been very few because it's a conflict area. So everything was like hypothetical and being discussed. If you find oil, if you find gas, how many of the government revenues will be given to the region? And then how will the region distribute that to their localities? These are all, again, part of this. In the end, the president said, hating kapatid, 50-50, sharing in government revenues, no improvement from the previous ARM law, which actually already provides for that. But the difficulty was initially he agreed, and then he agreed to raise it, and then said he went back to 50-50. So how do we get back to them? And we cannot say, sorry, the president changed his mind, right? We have to protect the president, but how to do it and get all the flack for reneging on what was already agreed on. So the annex on wealth sharing was all about that: taxes, special development fund, all of these shares in government revenues from all kinds of minerals, metallic, non-metallic minerals, fossil fuels, etc. So each one has a different scheme, and that was exactly the last section that we were able to finish, because they wanted all the metallic minerals to be listed in the agreement, and there are hundreds of metallic minerals. So in the end, they agreed not to do it, and we signed the agreement with only 4 women on our part, because all the men had to leave. This was like a extended meeting, and the men had something else to do, and only women were left. So at 10 p.m., we finally signed the agreement with 4 plus 1 woman, Ging Deles, who was observing the press secretary at the time. We finally finished it, and then eventually move on to complete the annex on power sharing. Power sharing is precisely the kind of Bangsamoro organic law that you find now. It talks about how the parliament is organized, how many seats, the allocation of seats. So it's a very unique arrangement. You have a parliamentary system. That was one of the big legal issue at the time. Can you have a parliamentary system in one part when you have a presidential system in the other part? And we argued that the Constitution only said that you should have an elected legislature and elected parliament, and it did not say it has to be similar to the local governments, which, by the way, local governments can also have parliamentary system if they change the local government code, so long as they comply with some of the basic requirements. And then basically allocation of seats, you have reserved seats, you have party list seats, and you have district representation. So it's an improved version of what you find in Congress, because there are reserved seats, National Congress, aside from the party list seats, and there are more party list seats, about 40%, as against 20% in the National Congress, which ideally should make it more representative and basically sort of like distribute power across the different political parties, because that's going to be required. So again, it's going to be a pioneering experience in shifting to a parliamentary system and really developing your political party system, at least at the level of the regional elections. At the local government, it's going to be different. It's under the same, although they release their own local government code, but basically it will follow the same procedure. So power sharing, difficulty here is last minute, they wanted all the details to be put in, just as we thought we had already finished it. Then they wanted all of these details that I just discussed with you put in the text. And one of the bone of contention is that can they have a vote of no confidence and call for a re-election, which our constitution does not allow because we have fixed terms, unlike in a parliamentary system. But I think they are able to call for a vote of no confidence, but no election, but just within the parliament to change. No, if there's a change in the political alignments, they might be able to change the chief minister under a vote of no confidence, but no election. I think I'm not so sure. I have to review the Bangsamoro Organic Law, but that was really, really very difficult, and it broke the night when we really could not agree on this vote of no confidence that will require an election. Finally, the annex on normalization. We knew that they will not agree to anything here until they know what they're getting in the power sharing and in the wealth sharing, because this is about their weapons and their combatants. So they were very wise, basically, to ask for very phased decommissioning of weapons and combatants alongside political compliance with the agreement, which meant that the elections will happen next year and phase 4 is not yet over. Yeah, so they will still have they've decommissioned already 26,000 combatants out of 40,000, which means that they will have the election with still 14,000 armed men and still more than 1,000 MILF, not personal weapons, which is going to be under a different jurisdiction, but MILF organizational weapons not yet decommissioned because of the very, very slow movement on this component. And it also includes provisions for transitional justice, which Dr. Veneracion is very much involved in, but unfortunately, there has been no mechanism to put up a national body that will see through a transitional justice process. This is one of our heartbreaks in the process. We already recommended to the president the nominees of people who will sit in a national transitional justice body, but on the eve of his last day where he is still authorized to appoint people, he still had many questions about the whole body, like will it have subpoena powers and so on. And at the end, he did not sign the executive order creating the body to oversee the National Transitional Justice and Reconciliation Commission. So it's up to President Marcos now to talk about transitional justice and reconciliation here. Or even my argument is the Bangsamoro can probably do it on their own, especially if they have significant funds. So this is basically the story. There are other side stories on the security components. Zamboanga siege, which happened while we were still negotiating. This you can see behind what happened to Zamboanga City after the siege that they experienced. So we were going around with the ceasefire team, taking a look, and then of course the issue of being able to work together. In the right photo, you will find our one of our infant soldiers from one infantry division, and the MILF on the right, in their T-shirts, BF, holding brooms as against the weapons being held by the soldiers, because this was a school cleaning operation that we did jointly with them. So part of trust building was precisely to do joint activities between combatants, our soldiers and their soldiers, and then this program with the children, dancing and everything. So, but unfortunately, this was in Butig. You know what happened to Butig, right? This is where the Maute brothers are. In 2016, they already attacked the municipality of Butig until they became quite stronger. And then you had Marawi later on in 2018. So, but otherwise, the MILF lost territorial control over significant parts of Butig because those who could no longer wait for the peace agreement or those who have been radicalized in different ideology already started, aligning themselves with ISIS. And that's why we had Marawi in 2018, 2017, but the martial law, lasted until the end of Duterte's President Duterte's term. So these are all just part of the side events, are to enhance the ceasefire, because you all know what happened in Mama Sapano. But even before Mama Sapano, we were already meeting with the police and the military how to coordinate so that we avoid unfortunate incidents where the police enters a community to issue a warrant of arrest, and then because they did not notify the military, or they did not notify our ceasefire committee, they're treated like intruders by everybody who has weapons there. And that's why we ended up with Mama Sapano. So before Mama Sapano and after Mama Sapano, we were already trying to clarify the ceasefire guidelines, meeting them, making the guidelines more explicit so that there is no confusion. But our problem was with the police still felt that the ceasefire tied their hands, and sometimes they wanted to do things on their own. There's reward money for Marwan, $1 million because and that's why they wanted his finger, because he seems to be related to somebody connected to 9/11. So that's why he had such a high price on his head, and the police wanted to do it on its own. When they got into trouble, the AFP was not prepared, helicopters were not there, rescue operation could not happen right away. But in the end, they were extracted by the AFP, because the AFP could enter with cooperation with the MILF so that they will not be harmed. So in any case, these are all side issues. Not all of these are there. Finally, the eve of the signing, on the day of the signing, before we went up to the stage, we were met by the president. And on the eve, of course, we had to transport Central Committee and other commanders of the MLF. So there was huge security arrangement to transport them from Mindanao to get to the airport, to the hotel where they will be billeted, to register them one by one. And still on the eve of the signing, a lot of still many difficulties. And the book will tell you some of these stories until we finally got to the day of the signing and we signed the agreement. There you are. You have the book there, the 6 copies of the book that that's all part of the story that I'm telling now. So let me conclude that by saying that I hope that the book will help others who are in the same situation, and that's why there's now growing international recognition of this work. I mean, probably we're not as so well known as the Colombia process or even the Sudan process, where you had Sudan divided into North and South Sudan eventually becoming independent. But there are a lot of similar conflicts in Asia, in Africa, almost everywhere of this nature, the right to self-determination type of conflict. And therefore, what we offer is something that is relevant to many of these different cases. Second, the fact that we have been able to sustain it 10 years after, when data shows that most peace agreements unravel after the 5 years, and then after 7 years, even more peace agreements just break down and nothing happens afterward, or they will have to renegotiate after renewal of conflict. And it's a good story so far, in the sense that there's still a lot of horizontal violence, but the vertical violence between the state and the MILF have basically subsided. There has been no conflict. MILF has not suffered any major breaks or factionalization within their own command. We don't know if elections will do that, but somehow the fact that we've stayed this long, it's still considered a success story in the rest of the world. This is my story. other possible versions can come out. Other people will have their own stories, and they're entitled to it. I'm just reminded again of to close just another anecdote when I was doing this paper on anti-US basis coalition for a book on Philippine coalitions published by the Institute for Popular Democracy in the 1998, and my case study was the US basis coalition. When I was presenting my findings, the late R.C. Constantino, I don't know if you know him, he said he objected to some of the parts because he said it does not reflect well on the movement, on the progressive movement. But I had to argue my case. But this is what happened. These are my findings. These are what people told me about their own story. And I just told him, I suggest you write your own story of the of your own experience in the, in the coalition against the US bases, which is basically a success story because we did put out the bases in 1992. So I'll end here with that message, and I believe I've exposed myself enough. Thank you very much.